The wealthy but lonely man. Eden Thompson was a man who had everything. As the CEO of one of the world's most successful tech companies, he lived a life many could only dream of. His mansion stood atop a hill, overlooking a sprawling city full of lights and endless possibilities. Expensive cars lined his driveway, each more luxurious than the last. And his bank account was so full that it seemed bottomless. Money wasn't something Eden ever had to worry about. Yet, despite all the wealth and luxury surrounding him, Eden felt a deep, gnawing emptiness inside. His life was a constant cycle of meetings, parties, and events where he was surrounded by people, but never truly seen. People were drawn to his wealth and his status, but not to him. They didn't care about his dreams, his struggles, or what he longed for deep down. Eden was tired of the fake smiles, the hollow relationships, the women who flocked to him for his money rather than his heart. His last few relationships had ended in disappointment, with women who praised his mansion but never his character, who loved his private jets but never his company. They didn't even know the real him, the man beneath the wealth and fame. He wanted to be loved for who he was, not what he had. He longed for someone who would see past the glittering exterior and appreciate the person inside. Eden knew it was impossible to find genuine affection in his world of excess. How could anyone love him for the right reasons when everyone around him was so focused on his money? The loneliness became unbearable. The lavish dinners, the grand parties, and the glamorous trips all felt meaningless. They were just distractions from the silence inside. Eden was stuck in a gilded cage, unable to escape the expectations that came with his fortune. One evening, after another disappointing night at a charity gala, Eden sat alone in his penthouse suite, staring out over the city. The lights twinkling below seemed so distant, like they belonged to another world. He thought about the people he'd met, the ones who had shown him affection because of his wealth. It was never real. It was always the same. Then, a bold thought struck him. What if he could escape the trappings of his wealth, just for a while? What if he could disappear from his life of luxury and find out if anyone would love him for who he truly was, and not for his riches? He made a decision right then and there. He would leave his mansion, his cars, his entire life behind. He would disguise himself as someone completely different, someone in need, someone who wasn't rich or powerful. He would live as a poor, crippled man, hidden from the world he had built, to see if he could find real love. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. Eden's parents were powerful and well-known, and they would worry about him. His staff would be left in the dark, unsure of where their boss had gone. But the idea of being truly seen, of being loved for who he was worth the risk. He knew the journey would be difficult, even dangerous. But he didn't care. For once, he was doing something for himself, something that could lead him to the one thing he wanted more than anything else, real love. With that, Eden packed a small bag, leaving his wealth behind without a second glance. He knew that the road ahead would be a far cry from the lavish life he'd been living, but it was the only path he could walk if he wanted to find the truth. His journey to find love, to find himself, had begun. A life of disguise. Eden's life of luxury was left behind as he began his journey into the unknown. He had sold his mansion, his cars, and everything that defined him as a wealthy man. What remained was a small sum of cash, enough for a few weeks of travel, and a sense of purpose that filled the void he had long felt. He traveled far from the city, to a remote village where no one knew his name and no one cared about his wealth. The village was nothing like the bustling, glamorous city he had come from. There were no towering skyscrapers or busy shopping districts. Instead, narrow dirt roads wound through small homes with thatched roofs. People here lived simple lives, working the land, tending to animals, and relying on each other for support. Eden, however, wasn't here to be part of the community in the usual sense. He had come to see if someone could love him without knowing who he was. Dressed in tattered, ragged clothes, Eden sat in a wheelchair he had purchased along the way. His legs, which once allowed him to command the world, were hidden beneath the worn fabric, and his face was partially obscured by a battered hat. He rode himself to a quiet corner at the edge of the village, where the bustling of the market didn't reach. It was a place where he hoped he would be forgotten, just another figure in the background of people's daily lives. The first few days were difficult. He had no way of knowing how long it would take for someone to notice him, to stop and ask if he needed help, to see him as a person instead of a beggar. Eden sat there from dawn until dusk, watching the world go by as people passed him without a second glance. Some people didn't even spare him a moment's pity. Others gave him a glance before walking away, uninterested in his plight. With each passing hour, his resolve weakened. He hadn't expected the road to be easy, but the solitude weighed on him. There was no recognition of his humanity, no one who saw him as anything but a crippled beggar. But Eden refused to give up. He believed that somewhere out there, there was a person who would see beyond the dirt and the disguise. He could feel it in his heart. He just had to wait. Then, on the 5th day, something changed. A soft voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you okay?" Eden looked up, startled. There, standing in front of him, was a young woman. She had kind eyes and a gentle expression, her face framed by unruly brown hair that cascaded down her shoulders. She looked at him not with pity, but with genuine concern. She wasn't distracted by his ragged clothes or his worn-out appearance. She saw something in him, a human being in need. Her name was Clara. Clara was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with a heart full of compassion. She had grown up in the village, the daughter of a humble farmer named Elias. Life had never been easy for Clara, her family wasn't wealthy, and her father worked tirelessly to provide for their small household. Yet, despite their struggles, Clara was always happy. She had learned from her father that love and kindness were more important than money, and she carried that belief with her wherever she went. As Clara approached Eden, her eyes softened. She could see how tired and hungry he looked, and despite her own lack of wealth, she felt compelled to help. Reaching into her small purse, Clara pulled out a few coins, handing them to Eden. "I know it's not much," she said gently, "but I hope it helps." Eden blinked, overwhelmed by her kindness. He had expected people to ignore him, or worse, mock him. But this woman, this stranger, had stopped to help. For the first time in days, Eden felt something stir in his heart, hope. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me." Clara smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "Do you have a place to stay?" she asked. Eden hesitated. He didn't want to burden her. "No," he said quietly, unsure of how to explain his situation without revealing the truth. Clara thought for a moment, glancing around. She didn't have much, but her father's home was small and welcoming. "I live with my father. Our house is modest, but you're welcome to stay the night. It's the least I can do." Eden was stunned. In all his life, he had never encountered such generosity. Most people would have turned away without a second thought, but Clara was offering him a place to stay, without hesitation. I don't know what to say," Eden murmured, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You don't have to say anything," Clara replied with a gentle smile. "Just let us help." With Clara's assistance, Eden left his corner on the street and made his way to her home, a small, cozy cottage on the edge of the village. As they walked together, Eden's thoughts soared. Could it really be this simple? Could someone like Clara, someone so kind, truly see him as a person and not just a beggar? For the first time in a long while, Eden allowed himself to hope again. He had come to the village in search of love, and perhaps, just perhaps, he had found a glimmer of it in Clara's kindness, genuine kindness. Clara's small cottage was a world apart from the luxury Eden had known. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but there was a warmth to it that Eden hadn't experienced in years. The walls were simple, the furniture worn but well-loved, and the smell of something cooking filled the air. Clara led him inside, showing him a small room that was surprisingly tidy, given the circumstances. It was modest but comfortable, a space that was clearly meant for hospitality. "Make yourself at home," Clara said gently, setting a small bowl of soup on the table before him. "I'll get you some more food in just a moment." "You must be starving." Eden nodded gratefully. His stomach had been aching from hunger, but it wasn't just the physical emptiness that had made him feel hollow. He had been starved of human kindness, of someone seeing him as more than just a rich, powerful man, or in this case, a beggar. Clara's kindness was more than just the food she offered, it was the care she showed him simply because he was a person, not because of what he could give in return. As Eden sat there, quietly eating the warm soup Clara had prepared, he felt something shift inside of him. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen. It wasn't just his wealth that had drawn people to him in the past, nor was it his position in life, it was his humanity that Clara had noticed, even when she didn't know who he was. "Thank you," Eden said quietly after taking his first few bites. His voice was thick with emotion, the gratitude he felt overwhelming. Clara smiled softly, then headed out of the room for a moment. When she returned, she was carrying a small bundle of clean clothes. "I thought you might like something fresh to wear," she said. "I can help you get cleaned up if you want. You're welcome to stay the night, of course." Eden felt a surge of warmth in his chest. There was no judgment in her actions, no hesitation. She was offering her kindness freely, without expecting anything in return. It was an overwhelming contrast to the superficial relationships he had known. Eden wasn't used to being treated this way. "I don't want to impose," he said, glancing down at the clothes in his hands. "You've already done so much for me." "It's no trouble at all," Clara insisted. "You're a guest here. You're welcome, truly. My father would be glad to have you stay the night." Elias, Clara's father, had been working in the fields all day, tending to the farm that supported their modest life. He was a quiet man, but Eden could see the lines of hard work and experience etched into his face. When Clara told him she had brought a stranger home, Elias was understandably skeptical. After all, it was rare for anyone outside the village to pass through, especially someone who appeared as Eden did. Clara, seeing her father's hesitance, explained gently, "He's just passing through. He's had a rough time and needs help. He's not here to cause trouble, I promise." Elias studied Eden carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. He had lived a long life and seen many faces, but he had learned over the years not to let his guard down too easily. However, he trusted Clara's judgment. If she saw something in Eden, perhaps he deserved a chance. "You're welcome to stay for dinner," Elias said gruffly, offering Eden a seat at their small table. His voice softened just a little as he added, "But I won't have anyone taking advantage of my daughter's kindness." Eden nodded, relieved. He knew that Clara's father had every reason to be cautious. The world was filled with people who would exploit others for their gain, but Elias's skepticism only made Eden more determined to prove himself worthy of the hospitality they were offering. The three of them sat down to a simple but hearty meal, vegetable stew and freshly baked bread. As they ate, the conversation turned to the everyday happenings of village life. Elias told stories of the farm, of the seasons, and of the community. Eden listened intently, grateful for the normalcy of it all. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, surrounded by people who lived simply but with so much heart. As the days passed, Eden found himself spending more and more time with Clara and her father. He helped Elias in the fields, learning about farming and the rhythm of the land. He had no experience with such hard labor, but Elias showed him how to plant seeds, tend to crops, and care for the animals. Clara, too, took him under her wing, showing him the quiet joys of village life. She introduced him to the small community of villagers, who welcomed him with open arms. Eden had never known such a life, no high-rise buildings, no meetings with important people, just simple living, shared with people who cared for one another. But as time went on, something began to change in Eden. He wasn't just grateful for their kindness, he was falling in love with Clara. There was something about her gentle nature, her determination, and her ability to see the world with kindness that drew him in. She wasn't like the women he had met in the city. She didn't care for his wealth or his status. She cared for him as a person, as someone who was struggling, just like anyone else. But with the blossoming affection came an unbearable weight of guilt. How could he allow himself to fall for Clara when he was lying to her? How could he love someone so deeply while hiding the truth about who he really was? Eden's internal conflict grew with each passing day. He felt guilty for allowing himself to enjoy Clara's company, knowing that the moment she learned the truth about his identity, everything would change. And yet, every time he looked into her eyes, every time they laughed together or shared a quiet moment, the guilt seemed to melt away, only to return again in full force when he remembered the deception he had built his life on. Clara had given him something real, something pure. But Eden wasn't sure if he could keep pretending any longer. The growing connection. As the weeks passed, Eden found himself growing more and more attached to Clara. Her warmth and kindness had pulled him in from the very first moment, but now he was beginning to see something deeper, her humor, her strength, and the gentle way she carried herself. She wasn't just helping him out of pity or obligation. Clara was becoming a friend, a confidant, and, more than anything, someone Eden began to care for deeply. They spent countless afternoons together, walking through the village, talking about everything and nothing. Clara laughed at Eden's jokes, even the silly ones, and he found himself laughing too, something he hadn't done in years. Her kindness was infectious, and every time he looked at her, his heart swelled with affection. Clara, too, began to feel the pull of their connection. She saw something in Eden that she hadn't expected. Though he had appeared poor and broken when they first met, she quickly discovered he was far more than his outward appearance. Eden had a sharp mind, a compassionate soul, and a quiet strength that reminded her of the men in her family who had worked tirelessly to build something lasting. She felt protective of him, wanting to help him heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. As the days went on, Clara's feelings for Eden deepened. She could see that he wasn't just some lonely man on the street, he was someone who had experienced hardship, someone who had dreams and desires, just like everyone else. The more they shared their lives, the more she saw the kindness in his eyes, the vulnerability that he kept hidden beneath the rough exterior. But as their bond grew, so did Eden's guilt. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the charade. He had begun to fall in love with Clara, but he was still hiding the most important truth about himself, who he really was. Every time Clara looked at him with those trusting eyes, every time she cared for him, offered him food, or tried to help him with his legs, the weight of his secret pressed down on him harder. She believed him to be a poor, crippled beggar, a man who needed help just to survive. But Eden wasn't that man. He was a billionaire. He had wealth beyond measure, but he had chosen this life to find something real. How could he face Clara when the truth came out? How could she ever forgive him for lying to her, for pretending to be something he wasn't? The tension between his feelings for her and the guilt of his deceit became nearly unbearable. He found himself constantly torn, part of him wanted to tell Clara everything, to confess the truth and let her decide if she still wanted him in her life. But another part of him was terrified of losing her. What if she rejected him? What if she could never forgive him for the lies he had told? As Aiden's internal conflict grew, a new challenge emerged. Clara's father, Elias, had been watching Aiden closely. Though he had warmed to the young man, he couldn't ignore the toll that Aiden's condition was taking on him. Aiden's legs were still weak, and while he had regained some strength from the daily tasks they shared, it was clear that he wasn't getting better. The old wheelchair he used wasn't enough, and Aiden's suffering weighed heavily on Elias's heart. One afternoon, after Aiden had spent the day working in the fields alongside him, Elias pulled Clara aside. "I've been thinking about Aiden," he said, his voice low but firm. "He's been with us for weeks now, and I can see how much he's struggling. We can't let him stay like this." Clara looked at her father, her heart heavy with concern. "What do you mean?" "I mean he needs medical help, Clara. His legs, they're not healing properly, and we don't have the means to help him like he deserves," Elias explained, his brow furrowed. "I've been saving up a little money from the farm, but it's not enough. We need more if we're going to get him proper treatment." Clara's heart sank. She didn't want Aiden to suffer, but she knew they had limited resources. Their family had always scraped by, living modestly. The idea of raising money for Aiden's medical care seemed daunting, but Clara knew she couldn't sit back and do nothing. He had been so kind to them, so willing to help on the farm, and now it was their turn to help him. "What if I ask the villagers to help?" Clara suggested. "They know Aiden. They've seen how hard he's worked. Maybe they'll pitch in to get him the care he needs." Elias considered this, his mind working through the possibilities. "It's worth a try," he said. "We may not have much, but there's no shame in asking for help when it's needed. We've seen the good in Aiden. It's time to show him the same." Clara nodded, a sense of determination in her eyes. She was going to help Aiden, no matter what it took. But as she made plans to raise the money, the thought of the truth, Aiden's hidden identity, loomed large in her mind. Could she raise money to help a man she didn't fully know? Would she still be willing to help him if she knew the truth about who he really was? The secret Aiden carried became even heavier as Clara's plan began to take shape. He didn't want to deceive her, but he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending. The pressure was mounting, and every day that passed made it harder to resist the urge to confess. Would Clara still want to help him if she knew the truth? Or would everything they had built together come crashing down? For Aiden, the connection he felt with Clara had become the most important thing in his life, but it also threatened to unravel everything. Would love, in its purest form, be enough to overcome the lies he had built around his identity? Or would his secrets destroy the very thing he had been searching for all along? The secret revealed. It was a cool evening when the truth came crashing down. Clara had just returned from the village market, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables. As she entered the small cottage, she noticed something strange. Aiden, who usually spent his days resting inside or helping her father on the farm, was nowhere to be found. Her brow furrowed in confusion, and she began searching the house, calling his name softly. "Aiden," she called, stepping into the small back room where they often kept the few tools they had. There, tucked under a pile of old blankets, was a small, unmarked envelope. Clara picked it up, curiosity piquing her. It had her name written on it in elegant, familiar handwriting, the kind of handwriting that didn't match the rough, unrefined nature of the man she had grown to care for. She tore open the envelope and found a letter inside. As she unfolded the paper, her heart skipped a beat. It was a letter from Aiden, one that explained everything. The truth, the lies, and the secret he had kept from her. Asterisk, Dear Clara. I know that by the time you read this, you will feel betrayed, and I deserve that. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, but I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew who I really was, you wouldn't want me anymore. That you would see me for the wealth I've accumulated and not the person I've come to be in your eyes. The truth is, I am not the poor man I claim to be. I am Aiden Thompson, the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world. I have wealth beyond measure, but I've never known real love. I left everything behind, my mansion, my luxury, my name, because I wanted to find someone who would love me for who I am, not for what I have. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope that one day, you'll understand why I did it. I wanted something real, Clara. And with you, I thought I had found it. I am sorry. Aiden. Asterisk. Clara's hands trembled as she read the letter, the words piercing her heart like 1,000 needles. The shock of it all was overwhelming. Aiden, the man she had come to care for, the man who had walked beside her father, laughed with her, shared her dreams, had lied to her from the very beginning. He was not the poor, struggling man she had believed him to be. He was someone entirely different. Tears welled up in her eyes as she collapsed onto the nearby chair. How could he have done this? Why had he pretended to be something he wasn't? He had gained her trust, her affection, and her family's goodwill. And yet, all of it had been built on a lie. When Elias returned home that evening, Clara was sitting quietly at the table, the letter still clutched in her hands. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. Without a word, she handed the letter to her father. Elias read it, his expression hardening with every line. "This is unforgivable," Elias muttered, his voice cold. "He took advantage of your kindness, Clara. He played us all for fools." But then, after a long silence, he sighed deeply. "But I can't say I didn't see it coming. People like him, they don't understand what it means to struggle. They don't know what it's like to live a life without everything handed to them. And maybe that's why he did this, to understand it. But that doesn't excuse his actions." Clara was still silent, her heart torn between love and betrayal. "I can't forgive him, Dad," she whispered. "Not right now. How can I? How could he think that lying to me was the only way to get my love? To get my trust?" Elias nodded, his face softening as he saw the depth of Clara's pain. "It's a betrayal. And it hurts. But that's your decision, Clara. If you can't forgive him, I won't blame you." Later that night, Aiden returned to the cottage, expecting to find the warmth and comfort of Clara and Elias's home. Instead, he found the house cold and silent. The door was ajar, and Clara was sitting at the table, still holding the letter in her hands. When Aiden entered, he froze, his heart sinking at the sight of her. Clara stood up slowly, her eyes red from tears. "You lied to me, Aiden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You lied to my family, to me. All this time. I thought you were someone I could trust. Someone I could love." Her words were quiet but full of pain. Aiden swallowed hard, feeling his own guilt tighten around him like a vice. "Clara, I never meant for this to hurt you," he began, his voice trembling. I thought that if I could just get someone to love me for who I am, maybe I could finally feel like I belong somewhere. But I made a terrible mistake. I should have told you sooner." "You should have never lied to me in the first place," Clara interrupted, her voice sharp. "I gave you everything. I opened up my home, my heart, and you took that trust and turned it into a lie. I can't just forget that, Aiden." Aiden's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, he couldn't find the words to speak. He had built this life on a lie, and now it was falling apart around him. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I never wanted to hurt you. Please believe me. I love you." I always have. Clara's eyes welled up with tears again, and she shook her head slowly. I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know who you really are. The days that followed were filled with a deep, uncomfortable silence. Word of Aiden's true identity spread quickly through the village, and the whispers began. The once respected man who had lived among them, pretending to be poor, was exposed for what he truly was, a man of wealth and privilege who had deceived everyone he had come into contact with. The villagers, too, felt betrayed. They had seen Aiden as one of their own, someone who had walked beside them, shared in their struggles, and joined in their community. But now, they saw him differently. They no longer trusted him. And Aiden knew, deep down, that he had lost everything. Clara could no longer look at him without feeling a sense of betrayal. Though her love for him hadn't vanished, it had been tainted by the lies he had told. And as time passed, Aiden began to realize the full extent of what he had lost, not just Clara's trust, but the respect of an entire village that had welcomed him into their lives. He was alone again, just as he had been before. But this time, the emptiness he felt was deeper, heavier. He had come to the village seeking love, seeking truth, but he had only found heartbreak. The redemption. Aiden sat on the edge of his bed in the small, rented room on the outskirts of the city, staring out the window at the sprawling skyline. The lights of the city seemed so distant, so unimportant now. He had spent his entire life chasing power, money, and recognition, but it had all led him to this, a quiet, empty room where he sat with nothing but regret. The truth was, no matter how much wealth he accumulated, no matter how many cars or mansions he owned, it all felt hollow now. The only thing that had ever truly mattered, love, had slipped through his fingers. He had lost Clara, the woman who had shown him real kindness, the woman who had made him feel alive for the first time in years. Aiden had tried to make amends. He had sent Elias a large sum of money, more than enough to cover his medical expenses, in an attempt to make up for his lies. He had promised Clara that he could offer her and her father a life of comfort in the city. The luxury, the fame, everything that once meant so much to him, he would now use to give them the life they deserved. But Clara had rejected him, and for the first time in his life, Aiden truly understood why. She had refused his offer to take her away from the village. I don't need the city, Aiden, she had told him quietly. I don't need anything but my family and this life. You can't buy me with your wealth. Her words had cut deep, but they had also been a revelation. Clara didn't need him to provide for her, she didn't want a life of luxury or comfort. She wanted truth. She wanted love. And Aiden couldn't offer her that with his lies. For days, Aiden wandered the city, his mind heavy with thoughts of Clara and her rejection. But as the days turned into weeks, something inside him began to shift. He realized that the life he had built, the life of luxury and power, wasn't the answer. It had never been the answer. If he truly wanted Clara's love, he couldn't offer her anything except the truth. He couldn't keep hiding behind his wealth. So, Aiden made a decision that shocked him as much as it shocked everyone around him. He was going to leave it all behind. He packed a single bag, left his mansion, and sold everything. The cars, the house, the business, all of it was gone. Aiden didn't want any of it anymore. It wasn't just about losing Clara anymore, it was about finding himself. Finding something real. He returned to the village. When Aiden arrived at the farm, he was met with stunned looks from Clara and Elias. Neither of them had expected him to come back, especially after everything that had happened. Clara stood silently at the door, her expression unreadable. Elias, too, watched him with skepticism in his eyes. But Aiden didn't say anything at first. He simply walked past them, heading for the small field where Elias had been walking. He picked up a shovel and started walking alongside him, his hands rough and blistered as he dug into the soil. Clara watched from the doorway, unsure of what to make of his return. Eden walked in silence for hours, not asking for anything in return, not offering excuses or explanations. He had come back to prove something, not with words, but with actions. He walked beside Elias, learning the rhythms of the land and the value of a hard day's labor. As the days passed, Eden began to show Clara and Elias that he wasn't the man he once was. He spent his days on the farm, waking up early to help with chores, learning how to plant and tend to the crops, and doing whatever was needed around the house. His life of wealth and luxury felt like a distant memory. The more he walked, the more he understood what it meant to live a life of humility and love, not for personal gain, but for the simple joy of helping others. Clara, at first hesitant, began to see the change in him. It wasn't easy for her to trust him again, and there were moments when she felt the old pain resurface. But as she watched him labor beside her father, as she saw his sincerity and dedication, she began to soften. Eden was no longer hiding behind a facade, he was finally being honest with her, with himself, and with the world. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after a long day's walk, Clara turned to Eden. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the fields, and for the first time in weeks, Eden felt a sense of peace. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything I did. For lying to you. For pretending to be someone I'm not. I thought I could find love by hiding behind my wealth, but I see now that I was wrong. All I ever needed was to be myself, to be real. And I know I've lost so much, but if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that I can be the man you deserve." Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Eden had never looked more vulnerable than he did in that moment. She could see the regret, the longing, and the sincerity in his eyes. After a long pause, Clara smiled softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "I've already forgiven you, Eden," she said. "It's not about the money. It never was. It's about who you are when you're real. And I think you've finally shown me who that person is." Eden's heart leaped with relief, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his past mistakes begin to lift. He wasn't perfect, and he had a long road ahead of him. But in Clara's eyes, he saw a future built on honesty, on love, and on the simple joys of life. Eden stayed in the village, walking alongside Clara and Elias. They built a life together, simple but full of love. He had learned that true happiness didn't come from wealth or status, it came from caring for others, from being true to oneself, and from sharing life's quiet moments with the people who mattered most. Clara and Eden's relationship blossomed in ways Eden had never imagined. He learned that love was never something you could buy, it was something you earned, through trust, kindness, and vulnerability. And for the first time, Eden understood that his happiness wasn't tied to his fortune. It was tied to the people he loved, and who loved him in return. Together, Clara and Eden built a life filled with joy, not because of what they had, but because of who they were. And Eden realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along, a love that was real, a love that was honest, and a love that, in the end, was worth more than any amount of money.